Walk with me through the cellar door.
A storm is coming, Francis.
A portal to a more skeptical world.
Cellar Door Skeptics begins right now. Prepare for the revolution with your hosts, Christopher Tanner and Chris Hanna.
Welcome to Cellar Door Skeptics with your hosts, Christopher Tanner and Chris Hanna. It's been a lovely Tuesday night here in the middle of Grand Rapids, Michigan. In the middle of the beginning of spring, through chaotic weather, on this wonderful Tuesday, March 29th. Welcome to the show that we like to call Cellar Door Skeptics. We're a science show, we're a religion show, we're a talk show. Hell, we're a Chris and Chris show. And we're here tonight to talk about kind of a hodgepodge of topics. And before we get too far into the show, we just kind of want to bring up a couple of different things. I know we throw some GoFundMes out there for the last couple of weeks. Hopefully everybody was able to share them or to help donate to those in need. But tonight we're going to talk about several different topics. We're going to get into crazy shit I used to believe back in the day. We're going to talk about bad sex, and no, it's not what you think it is. We're going to talk about free speech versus sensibility. And we're going to close the show out with 8 reasons atheists convert to Christianity. And before you shut it off right here, because if I were listening to a podcast, the first thing I'd be like is, oh, atheist podcast, oh, they converted to Christians, it was Easter weekend last weekend, boop, see ya. So before you hang up, trust me, we do not agree with the 8 reasons atheists convert to Christianity, but we do want to discuss it because a friend of ours, Mr. Krigler, and hopefully he'll listen to the show too, but Mr. Krigler brought it to our attention, and he's a Christian, and he likes to ask people to give their opinions all the time. And so I used to just give short opinions, and then he'd get pissed at me and be like, "Oh, you're just being mean to me," and blah blah blah. So this time I gave him a very well thought out 8 input opinion. Then I thought, well, this would be a good topic for the show, because how many times do you hear that Christians claim atheists convert? I mean, they throw that in our face all the time. And just getting through this Easter weekend, well, that's kind of one of the big things that we want to look at, because, how many people do convert back? How does it affect those around them? And is there pressure that goes into it? But before we go any farther, let me introduce my wonderful host, Mr. Chris Hanna. How are you tonight, sir?
I'm tired. I'm tired driving around all over the state of Michigan for the family holiday stuff. It's part of the compromise of being married to a Lutheran light. And her family is pretty religious, so I make the commiseration or the compromise, depending on your perspective, to whether or not I go and we have the Easter dinner. It's more like a Thanksgiving dinner for me, without the slaughter of all the Native Americans. It's just one person dies. It's a celebration. So I don't know. It's just a fun weekend to see the family.
Maybe we don't know if they really died or not. We're just taking a bunch of old people's words on that one.
Yeah. Well, let's say that the whole bunch of people were crucified, and maybe one of them is the one we're celebrating.
Could be.
It's a strange thing to celebrate, but either way, it's just a family dinner thing. And so I drove back across the state, just got home like immediately. So I'm, it's going to be a fun show because we got it's like a mixed show. It's a multifaceted Swiss Army knife show that we've got planned, which sometimes we have themes, but this one just kind of came together with all kinds of craziness. And sometimes it's fun to do that. Like the bad sex one, it's like bad sex in literature, and there's an awards that they give out every year. That's what we're going to be talking about. That one's going to be fun and goofy, so we're not super serious all the time.
So anyway, let's dive into the show here before we waste too much time. The first article that I wanted to talk about, the first thing I wanted to talk about tonight was some sort of a film festival. And I'll be honest, I'm not big into film festivals in the aspect of I don't care about people putting on multi-million-dollar production movies where these people make outrageous amounts of money and, they get to live high and dry for the rest of us who have to go pay $10 a fucking pop to go see. But this caught my attention because there was a movie at one of these festivals, a festival that Robert De Niro founded, that wanted to show an anti-vaccination movie. Now, it's celebrities, right? Most of the celebrities out there probably do, have some sort of an opinion. So why is this any different? Why is this a big deal? Who really cares to a point, what Robert De Niro, out of anybody, thinks about vaccinations? I mean, we really shouldn't be getting whether we're going to vaccinate our kids from Robert De Niro, for fuck's sake. But, I know people do that type of stuff. And so I started to dig into it a little bit, and then a day later, all of a sudden it says he pulled the anti-vax documentary from his film festival. And I thought that was a little odd, because why would he want it, and then why would he change it? What would be the logic in that? So
he's not I just wanted to break it. He's not the founder. He's one of the big top end people, but it's not his particular film festival. He's just like one of the main sponsors, so he has a lot of power. He's a big name.
I don't know. The articles I read, it says that he founded it along with Jane Roventhal and some Craig Hatkoff back in 2002.
What I saw was that he was just one of the sponsors. I didn't know he was running the whole thing. So holy crap. Yeah, no, that is a big deal. If he's running the whole show and he's wanting to put out some anti-vax movie, that's a pretty big step. Pulling it back immediately. Did you see why he pulled it back? Is that what we were going to talk about?
Yeah, that's what we're going to talk about, because I think it's interesting, to kind of look at it, because we got to get into a free speech thing. And, I don't believe in censorship, and I guess from my understanding, I guess let's tell everybody what the name of the festival is. The name of the film festival is called Tribeca Film Festival. There you go. So hopefully it's easy to remember. We'll throw links into the description. They have sponsors. They've grown since 2002. It's very, very large compared to what it used to be. And yeah, to me, it's very interesting to look at this film festival, because what they tried to do when they originally started it was get, the film producers, the actors, these people who write for these movies, and put them on stage and get you to ask them questions, to talk to them about their art, basically. And we can consider movies art. I consider movies a form of art. And to me, that's kind of a genius idea. It gets people more in touch with who they are watching on the screen. But what happened was he originally wanted to air this anti-vaccination documentary for the festival, and he originally said, this is close and dear to my heart, I guess, and I have not confirmed through sources, but from my understanding, he has a child with one of his wives that has autism. And basically what this was, the name of the film is called Vaxxed, From Cover Up to Catastrophe. It's directed and co-written by somebody named Andrew Wakefield. And again, I've never heard of him. I've never really been an anti-vaxxer, that aggressively, and it's just, he's never a term that's ever came up in my world. Originally, I guess the name Andrew Wakefield, he wrote some sort of a medical journal article for the British medical journal, The Lancelot, in 1998. And I guess later on it became retracted in 2010. And basically the study was about, it involved 12 children trying to create a link between vaccinations and autism, specifically the MMR vaccination. Yeah. And he's been discredited.
His paper is the big one. That's the one that was like the one in like 1,000 papers that everybody latched onto that basically made a link. His is the one that everybody said was, oh, that's the proof. And once it was retracted, they still cite that paper. They still cite that source. It's one of the most frustrating things in the world that, like, sometimes these papers get published and sometimes they get retracted, but it doesn't matter. It's the one time that confirmation bias hits and it sticks. Like, yeah. His is the one. That's the one that everybody sources with that connection. And even though it's been completely debunked by the scientific community, he's got a documentary. He's still pushing that agenda.
And what's interesting is that, I guess, and we could talk about whether they should have pulled the movie or not. I mean, we could talk about that in a minute, but the background on this is basically he's accusing the CDC of knowingly infecting people and making them autistic. I mean, that's what his claims are. And just that alone, that conspiracy theory mentality alone is immediate red flag for me, without even knowing his work or anything that he does. But one of the big things that happened is when he was debunked, he didn't just disappear off the face of the earth. Now he's got this movie. Robert De Niro's film festival is picking this movie up. Well, a day later, after he was questioned about it, he basically says, my intent in screening the film was to provide an opportunity for a conversation around an issue that is deeply personal to me and my family. But after reviewing it over the last few days with the Tribeca Film Festival team and others in the scientific community, We do not believe it contributes to any further discussion than he had hoped. So that's his official statement that he gave, and I'm reading from the New York Times, and again, links will be in the description. You know, the actual film festival has not made an official statement. You know, Mr. Wakefield's Twitter talks about it being a whistleblower documentary, and we all know how well those go over or how statistically accurate any of them are.
You know, people like that controversy. Like, they're immediately drawn to that. So this thing gets blocked, it gets pushed back, and it's going to give fuel to this documentary. People are going to want to see it, even though they're maybe even convinced that the scientific community says this is all wrong. They're still going to want to see it just because it's being talked about. It's one of the things that marketing, they talk about. There's no such thing as bad publicity. And that's what I think they were trying to get rid of when it comes to blocking this from this festival, is essentially it's bad science. And it's not going to help the conversation at all because it has been shown that it's incorrect. And so, in an effort to keep bad stuff out of the limelight, they decided probably to pull this out. And I would say this is the same kind of thing when it comes to Richard Dawkins not wanting to debate with any of the science or the creation scientists, because, well, one, they're not scientists, but they don't want to give them limelight. They don't want to give them any more time because it gives them legitimacy. And there's good things like what Bill Nye did with just kind of help show, you know, the humility of science and the great things of science, but it still gave Ken Ham a huge audience and a ton of marketing. I think that's what they were trying to avoid, is to try to avoid giving this guy any more publicity than he already has had, with people like Jenny McCarthy saying that autism's guaranteed link to vaccinations. I mean, I understand Robert De Niro's perspective. He's got an autistic kid. I'm sure he probably wants to learn and, you know, get the word out there as much as he can. And I do think it's nice to see that he had enough humility to realize that the scientists that he talked with said, listen, this is not a good idea. And he took their advice, their expert advice, because he says that he talked to a scientific community personnel. That's a good sign for me that he actually understood that and that they kind of pulled that away. That's basically the best thing I can take away from removing that from the documentary list itself.
But one of the things that before we move too far is we got to talk about this. I mean, he probably doesn't have the right just by himself to do it. I mean, they have a whole council. There's a whole team that puts this festival together. But my biggest concern is why they pulled it. I mean, it looks like from this New York Times article, the reason they pulled it, a lot of the spokespeople and what's been talked about, is that they basically had a conversation with some scientists. They started doing some research, and they started finding some troubling aspects to Mr. Wakefield. We found another article from Science Blogs, a site that I visit actually quite frequently because one of our friends, Abby, is on that site. And that's one of the sites that she writes for. But they talk about that in this, and they take a little bit more of a scientific look at it. And they explain why this movie is probably a very horrible thing. But I'm not so sure we should get rid of it. I'm not so sure we should do anything more than condemn it, because it's kind of like, you know, the Ken Ham films. I hate them. I can't stand seeing them. I don't ever want my kids to see Ken Ham stuff, but they're going to. It's probably going to come up. You know, the neighborhood we live in, you know, there's a lot of creationists over here. You know, so there's a lot of people that see this. So at some point, we got to look at it and say, you know, did Mr. De Niro and the board really make the right decision by pulling it? Did they really genuinely make that a good decision, or should it be allowed to? I know we talked about teaching the controversy. This is obviously would be like teaching the controversy.
Yeah.
You know, but when we look at that actual film festival, that film festival right there is not a public entity, right? It's privately owned. It's privately held. They have money backing them, and they're like their own corporation, and they should have the right to pull or not pull based on their beliefs of what this could do to it.
I agree entirely. It's their personal decision. I am also torn to the idea of, you know, this kind of stuff needs to be out there and proven wrong. But what I would say is this is kind of like the propaganda film. Like, we hear stories about something being shown in a documentary and getting light. There's a bunch of movies that are on Netflix that you can see. There's the Zeitgeist. It's this movie, and it's just nothing but a spin and a bias in a certain direction. And after watching those, you know, even a skeptical person, I'm like, oh man, I need to look into this more. And so, I mean, there could be something good there that people could see this and want to research more and learn how bad that documentary is. But I would rather have the scientists and the scientific community maybe break down to lay terms why this is wrong, or why that argument is wrong, and why Wakefield was forced to remove his paper. And I believe his license was revoked in the scientific community for falsification, or the specific thing that he was. His license was revoked over failure to disclose financial conflicts of interest and ethics violations. So that could be, that's a pretty big deal. He didn't disclose financial conflicts of interest, so maybe he had money invested in this anti-vax stuff, as well as ethics code violations. That he pushed forth something, he overlooked something that was important in the scientific process itself. So the reasons for removing this guy out, to me, would be enough that he shouldn't have a voice like he is with this controversial movie and the documentary scene.
But who are you to say that he shouldn't get a voice? Who are you to say that he's not allowed to have a say in what's going on, right? You shouldn't be able to make that. I get that, maybe if you owned your own business, you wouldn't want that, right? You wouldn't want anybody to be able to say that. But you shouldn't get to say that he no longer gets a voice, because to me that free speech thing is more important than your opinion and on how harmful it can be. I mean, there's a certain point, I guess, when we would want to look at free speech and say, okay, it's now harming somebody, so it's no longer free.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the free speech aspect of something would be like if we were saying, no, you can't have that out there at all, and you can't even put it on the internet, you can't put it anywhere. But I don't know if I just not so much saying that he shouldn't have a voice. I'm basically saying that I'm okay with the film festival saying, no, we don't want your product in our stores, in our festival.
One of the things that the article talked about that I found on science blogs is basically the censorship aspect, because it's not technically censorship, right? He isn't being censored by Tribeca. They just don't want him there. They've done that before. That they've got rid of movies. They don't have to publish those different movies. They don't have to do those other things. So freedom of speech doesn't mean that Mr. Wakefield and anyone who's been conned or persuaded, if you want to call it that, into believing pseudoscience can make whatever sort of propaganda film they want, provided they can find the resources to do so. It also means that the Tribeca Film Festival can screen the same pseudo bullshit propaganda film if they want to. But it is us, as journalists, as podcasters, as people who want to speak out, as bloggers, right? It is up to us to make a decision to refute his long history of promoting bullshit, and it's up to us to be able to speak out against it. It's not censorship. It's just us speaking out. And I always want to caution people is we don't want to say you can't speak here. You can't do this here. You aren't allowed to be over here. I want to caution people we don't want to do that. But in my household doesn't have to watch it. I don't have to put a sign up in my yard saying I support or don't support this. And if I owned a private company, I don't have to fucking air it.
Yeah, as long as the government isn't saying, Mr. Wakefield, you can't do any kind of movie on this thing that you think about, your opinion, whatever. That's the censorship that we're talking about. When it comes to, I guess, this is a market situation. This is the free market. This is movies. This is Hollywood. This is all of those things. They're not being censored by this. It's just, okay, you can't come into our group, but nobody's really telling this guy you can't do what you want. You can put it on YouTube and you can try to swing as many people to your cause as you can. I don't see the censorship. I do agree with the Tribeca Film Festival. I think it's good that we kind of minimize this stuff. I do kind of agree with you that we shouldn't shut it out completely, because we do need to refute this stuff. But I would rather let the scientific community refute this than moviegoers who are like, oh well, I'm a basic machinist. I can agree with this documentary and all of its scientific perspectives. It's not my place, and I'm not an expert in it. So it's dangerous to have it out there, but it's also important that he has his voice. And I think he has his voice. I just don't think it has its place in the film festival, and the people who are in charge of it I agree with them.
Well, cool. Well, I think we've exhausted this topic. We both agree that free speech should be free speech, but it doesn't mean that you should get to say your shit in other people's space.
Yeah, you can't come to my event and make me play your stuff. Like, you can't force me to do that. Then you'd be violating my free speech to say, no, I don't want to listen to that.
So freedom of speech does not equal freedom of criticism. And I think as we leave the segment, that's the one thing that we need to understand is that we should be able to criticize. We should be able to go after them. We should be able to support Tribeca's decision as a film festival to say, no, I don't want this. And I'm glad they reached out, did the research, looked into it, understood that, this whistleblower documentary really isn't going to be a whistleblower documentary, and that somebody who decided to basically make money or had money investments inside of the one scientific thing that he discovered that tainted it. It made it biased. It's not something that we can just accept. We can't just go, well, he had an unbiased thing. And that's the great thing about science is that there are certain regulations set up to get your stuff published. And when things are discovered that violate that somebody hid, they can revoke it. They can change their opinion. And that's the best thing about science, is that science is constantly changing and evolving to adapt to the newest, most factual information out there. Make sure you stick around, because we'll be right back with more Cellar Door Skeptics. We'll be talking about crazy shit Chris used to believe, along with bad sex. The best, worst sex scenes in the world. We'll be right back with more Cellar Door Skeptics.
Hello, I'm Miss B. Haven.
I'm Demanda Wright.
And we're
promoting secular feminism. And you're listening to Cellar Door Skeptics.
Like what you're hearing? Check out more Cellar Door Skeptics every week right here on Spreaker and iTunes. Make sure you come back and check out new episodes with your hosts, Christopher Tanner and Chris Hanna. And always, remember, prepare for the revolution.
Hi, I'm Ron Reagan, an unabashed atheist, and I'm alarmed by the intrusions of religion into our secular government. That's why I'm asking you to support the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the nation's largest and most effective association of atheists and agnostics, working to keep state and church separate, just like our founding fathers intended. Please support the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Ron Reagan, lifelong atheist, not afraid of burning in hell.
Hi, this is Sharon Bush, newest and most badass host of the Unbuckling the Bible Belt podcast, and you're listening to Cellar Door Skeptics.
Now, back to the show.
His tongue is long and hard and tastes of mint. We don't say anything, but he pushes me to my knees in the middle of the shop. It's difficult to undo his flies. I put my hand in. It's hot and damp. And then Christ, it's amazingly huge. It just goes on and on. As thick as a Magnum, a Jeroboam, a Methuselah, a bitter pump, a fucking amazing salami. Shut up, John. He takes off his clothes until he's just wearing boots. I hook my nails into his really taut bottom, and he pumps and nearly chokes me. How did he get his trousers off over his boots? I mean, does he take his boots off and put them back on again? Shut up. I pull my dress off, and I'm naked. He reaches down and roughly grabs me between the legs. I can feel his long, bony finger slip inside me. His thumb reaches into the crack of my bottom, and he lifts me up. A bowling ball? A six-pack? Like I was as light as a feather. She got to his cock and stuck it between her teeth like a cigar. Welcome back to Cellar Door Skeptics. Tonight, we're going to start the segment off by talking about Bad Sex and Fiction Awards. something Chris Hanna brought to our attention. I guess this is like a game or something that this blog plays, where they write down and give the worst sex story or the worst sex scene award in literature every year.
Oh.
And I could tell you that one was amazingly bad.
Oh man, it's like a 13-year-old who just hit puberty, who's just learning like the weird things to compare sex organs to, or a variety of other really strange things. I was flipping through Reddit one day and I saw this, like, they've been keeping track since 1993 of the Bad Sex and Fiction Award, and I was like, holy crap, are you serious? That's a long time. So it's the nothingrulebook.com. It's a blog. It's pretty cool, and these guys are talking about this list, and they list them all off. And from 1993, it's the RAM of sex. They're really funny. I just thought it'd be fun to just goof off a little bit. And that one that you just read was one of the ones that I thought was really one of the good ones, but I thought it might have been too long, so I decided maybe I'll hold back on it. But that one had me laughing out loud. I was reading these while the family was at the church at Easter, the Easter, I don't know what ceremony, sermon, whatever it's called. And so I thought it was just absolutely hilarious. And so, have you ever read anything like? Do you read much? Do you go through fiction or anything like that, where you see a sex scene in books or anything like this?
Not typically. A lot of the fiction books that I read are Stephen King. I'm a big Stephen King fan, and I spent a lot of my time reading Stephen King books. I have read some vampire books. I've read some Anne Rice type stuff. I've read, our friend Mr. Wrath. I've read a book of his, and that aspect of it, I don't get these weird sex scenes. Now, I will tell you, there was a point in my life when I was younger where if I could get my hands on some sort of I don't even know what type of novel they call these anymore, but they're basically horribly written sex novels is what they are, and they're nothing but a bunch of women and men going around having affairs, having sex, blah, 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 blah. I've read some of those, but that's not a typical standard in my house.
Yeah, I can't remember the name. It's like Bourgeois or something along those lines. They're the steamy daytime erotic books or whatever. I know exactly what you're talking about. Like, those are the ones that had, who was the Fabio, the guy on the cover, is like, his hair's flowing in the wind and there's like a horse and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, dude. And he goes, those were really funny. Like, I like to read a lot of science fiction and stuff, and it's a very male-dominated literature genre. And so every once in a while, there's a sex scene in there because why not, really? And sometimes it's decently done. Sometimes these guys have enough of a classical training when it comes to writing and stuff that you get a solid writing experience. And if there's a romantic notion, a romantic subplot, or a big portion of the story that has to do with that, you get a good scene. And sometimes you're like, wow, that was really well done, or oh my God, that was so awkward, it hurt. And I never really thought about it. Some of them I had read that were really bad, and some of them were really good. And then I stumbled onto this blog, and I was like, there's no way this stuff is legit. But sometimes, it's I don't know if it's going through the list of all of these pages. It seems this whole list is very male dominated. From first glance, I didn't see any female writers, so I don't know if that's something that they talk about, like the male perspective of like pornography and sexuality it's just different. And so when translation into literature is a little more difficult, that could be something that I could be completely and totally wrong about. It could have something to do, but that's just speculation on my part. But the one that I picked, then the reason I picked it is the science stuff. That's the stuff that always gets to me. I couldn't
science stuff. You like the science.
Oh, that was the weird part.
You like science and sex? I mean, is that what you like? You're like, hey, honey, let me get together, get my lab coat on, get my little glasses, my Einstein wig. Let me mix up a little bit of a condom here for you.
That's the role play. That's not quite what I thought was funny about this. I don't role play. I don't have the ability to suspend.
Are you sure? I'm going to text your wife tonight I'm going to be like, hey, does Hannah own a science costume?
No.
Does he have like little goggles and crazy Einstein hair that you guys use in the bedroom sometimes?
The closest I get to any kind of role play is Halloween, dressing up as like favorite characters, like cosplay, or favorite literary characters, like the Phantom or the Opera and stuff like that. But
But do you have sex when you're in costume?
No, I have never yet. But there's plenty of
then it's
life
not
left,
role-playing
right? There's
then.
plenty of life left. That we'll see what happens in the future. No, but anyways, what I read this one of the little segments, and I couldn't say the word at the end of it. It was the biggest freaking word I've ever seen in a sex scene. And this guy Tom Wolfe, it says "I Am Charlotte Simmons" is the name of the book, and it says Hoyt began moving his lips as if they were trying to suck the ice cream off the top of a cone without using his teeth. Slither, 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 slither went the tongue. But the hand, that was what she tried to concentrate on. The hand, since it has the entire terrain of her torso to explore, and not just the otorhinolaryngologica. It's the biggest caverns. I can't even say the word. It's just massive science word that I don't even know what it means. I should have looked it up. And but if you're gonna throw something like that into a science or a sex scene, you're doing it wrong. First off, because
I could tell you what it means.
Did you look it up?
That? I googled it while you were struggling to pronounce the word. I googled it.
I just did too. That's gross.
It says otorhinolaryngological is how like the internet tried to tell it to me, and it says it is of or relating to the medical practice involving the ear, the nose, and the throat.
That's so bad.
That's what dictionary.com says.
So that word caverns is the way they described, I'm guessing, oral sex, but that is just the worst. Unless you're writing a sex scene in a medical journal, I don't understand why you would ever use that word. Oh man.
You'll have to use that. You'll have to text Jen later or something like that and see if she knows what that is, and if because she says that she's a sapiosexual or whatever, and see if that word maybe that's why. Maybe somebody's trying to cater to that sapiosexual, lifestyle or something like that.
No, that's way too nerdy for even the sapiosexual. That's
way too nerdy. How can it be too nerdy?
No, nerdy, like way too.
Oh,
like that's
okay.
that's the lab coat sex that you were talking about. I don't think there's any. I don't think there's any way. I don't know. It was a fun topic. I can't believe that they do this. That they have a contest where they try to pick the worst one, and they're all amazing. So we're gonna include that link in there. You guys can read this through and have a chuckle with your coworkers or whatever, because it's relatively safe for work. That was what surprised me, because I mean, you can't be incredibly graphic in a novel like this. You need to kind of use synonyms, and you need to use other buzzwords for it. And I think that's one of the reasons why some of this stuff is so funny, because they're trying not to just write like just a complete snuff film, just absolutely hardcore. And so like, they're going into it a little bit differently and trying to use their literary prowess, and sometimes it just ends so badly.
It does. Some of them just horrible. So my favorite one was from Norman Mailer's The Castle in the Forest.
Oh.
It was a 2007 winner. And it goes like this. It says, "Then she was on him. She did not know if this would resuscitate him or end him. But the same spite, sharp as a needle, that had come to her after Fanny's death was in her again. Fanny had once told her what to do. So Clara turned head to foot and put her most unmentionable parts down on his hard-breathing nose and mouth, and took his old battering ram into her lips. Uncle was now as soft as a coil of excrement. She sucked him on him nonetheless, with an avidity that could come only from the evil one that she knew. From there, the impulse had come. So now they both had their heads at the wrong end, and the evil one was there. He had never been so close before. The hound began to come to life right in her mouth. It surprised her. Alas, had been so limp. But now he was a man again. his mouth lathered with her sap. He churned around and embraced her face with all the passion of his own lips and face, ready at last to grind into her with the hound.
Oh my God.
To me, excrement should never come anywhere near sex.
The soft coil.
I mean, I understand that could happen, right? But that's something that we should... Why would they describe it like that? As a soft coil of excrement. That's the name of the show, I guess. Maybe we should name the show A Soft Coil of Excrement.
Oh, man.
Jesus.
If you want to...
Who the fuck wrote it? I almost want to buy this book now, right? I almost want to buy the book just to read that, to see if this is real. Because, like, this is epically... This is just insanity to me. Who the fuck would write that? And then it goes into the evil.
That's pure epic fail there, man. That is pure epic fail. That was the other one I read, and I was just like, man, soft coil of excrement. That is something you should never use to describe any kind of sex organ. I don't care. I mean, unless you are like a regular subscriber to Two Girls, One Cup. I guess
scat fetishes.
Yeah,
I think you. I do think you like scat fetishes, Chris.
Oh man, well, I just can't.
No,
I appreciate them doing what they got to do, but I just can't. No, this doesn't work for me. I don't.
Well, speaking of epic failures,
Start the proceedings.
crazy shit Chris used to believe.
Brought to you by Cellar Door Skeptics.
See, that intro music right there, Chris, that is just epic. But without further ado, we want to have a conversation about crazy shit I used to believe. We seem to do this segment at least once a month, every couple weeks, I don't know, something like that. And I thought we'd do this more often, but it just kind of is one of those things that we have to be in the mood for. No pun intended. And so one of the things that I used to believe, and I don't know, Chris, if you ever were introduced to this, was as a Baptist, we believed in salvation, through grace. And once you're saved, you're always saved. And so as a Baptist, that was one of the things that we were taught. So, you would basically, as a child, you would accept Christ into your life, and then you had to dedicate your life to Christ through baptism. And baptism wasn't a requirement, but it was something that was very heavily recommended. Because you can't just be saved by, works, which is what some religions believe. You can't just be saved by a conversation, by just saying a prayer and thinking it. You actually have to be saved through grace. And that means something a little bit different than what a lot of people, use it. And so this is how my church used to justify it. They say, when one is born again, he is justified, declared righteous forever, by God's unalterable decree. All that believe are justified from all things. This must include all future sins as well as past sins. And they cite Romans 5, 1 and 9. They cite Acts 13:39. And they cite a couple other passages. But that was one of the things growing up as that way I did, is that, the whole goal was to get them saved, right? Because once they're saved, the only way they can be saved is if Christ says, hey, you're saved now. God has to grant you salvation. It's not something that you can just say, I want to do this, therefore I am saved. If Christ does not grant it, you aren't saved. And that's what we grew up believing. And then you would become baptized, and that's how you basically showed the world that you were ready to become be an out Christian. You were ready to go out and do all those things. And I think there's a movement that went around from Sam, and I can't remember his last name, Sam Singleton, where he would do unbaptisms for a while. At some of his shows, you get a little plaque that says you're unbaptized. But we believe that. We believe once saved, always saved.
Wait, so I'm familiar with the term, that basically you can be forgiven for your sins through, accepting Christ into your heart, blah, blah, blah. But this is a little bit different than that. This is essentially once you're baptized, even if you're baptized or whatever, you're good forever, regardless.
Yeah. Yes.
So as long as
once you're saved, you can't lose your salvation.
So let's say you're saved and you commit one of the horrible sins. They're all over in the book. What kind of punishment?
Well, give me an example.
Well,
just
murder, adultery.
Just do some sort of an example.
Murder, adultery, any of those things that are considered.
Okay. So what would happen? So let's say I got saved. I actually got saved when I was 6 years old. I got saved in I believe it was a Kroger's parking lot in Ohio, actually. I can't tell you exactly what grocery store. I'm pretty sure it was a Kroger's, though, because those were kind of like the Meijers up here. If you're in Ohio, Kroger's is the big thing. And I was saved when I was 6, from my mom. My mom, led me to Christ according to, Baptist doctrine. And I asked Christ into my life when I was 6 years old. Sitting in the front seat or the back seat, probably the back seat. I don't know if it was illegal at the time to sit in the front seat as a child or not, but I was sitting in one of the damn seats, and that's when I asked Christ into my life, and it was this big thing. My mom told the whole church, everybody celebrated, blah, blah, blah. And as I got older, you start to learn those things. You learn what happens when you get murdered, and so or when you murder somebody. So I asked that question. That question came up in my Sunday school. I asked the question, well, what happens if you murder somebody? Why should that person get to go to heaven too? And what they do is they basically have different tiers in heaven. Is what they do. They have different layers or levels you can get to. Level 1 is base level, right? You're gonna get a shitty house, and you're gonna get to sleep, not by the lake. You're gonna be in some woods in the middle of nowhere with mosquitoes and blah blah blah. But you're still gonna be in heaven, which is better than being in hell. And if you go the next step up, You will be in a little bit better house. It'll be a smaller mansion, not quite as big as the other mansions, and you'll have it so. And you can't see my hands. My hands right now are picturing a mansion. I'm building a mansion in my house, with my hands. And basically, that's what happens: is you get the lowest level if you murder somebody, but you still get to go to heaven, which is, according to them, hell was a real place. So it was epically better than going to hell.
Well, the only thing that springs to mind is like the Divine Comedy through Dante. Is that there's multiple levels of paradiso, or paradiso, and there's multiple levels of hell. Like I did not know that was the way that worked. That's crazy. And so essentially you're saved. So once you're initially saved, you go to heaven no matter what. But you could go to like the projects of heaven.
Yeah. Yeah, basically.
Oh, that's something that I never would have expected. But even more so to this is, how the hell do you take, like, I would assume that your baptism and the acceptance of Christ into your life would happen in a church of some kind. What the hell are you doing this in a Kroger parking lot for? Like, was that just like you had?
Well, you didn't have to.
Did you just feel the Holy Spirit?
You didn't have to be saved in church.
So was it just like you and your mom, or was there other people?
Yeah. No, it was just me and my mom.
Huh.
And I can actually tell you, I can picture the parking lot and the vehicle that we're sitting in, but, outside of that, I don't remember what the hell I said personally. It was only eventful in the sense that I was a 6-year-old and I was impressionable, and it was eventful. So, no, you could get saved anywhere. That was the whole point of, to a point of being a Baptist, and that's why we had to be good missionaries no matter what we did. So, I didn't have a lot of secular friends growing up because my parents didn't believe in it, but they should have, because in essence, my life should have been able to witness to the other people. I should have been able to help lead people to Christ. And I remember, there were some neighbors of ours that we had that their son was definitely a hellion. They paintballed our house. He tried to hit me with nunchucks. He shocked me. He stripped a what do they call? I don't remember. A nightlight. He stripped it down to the filaments and shocked me with it. Which isn't the end of the world, but this kid was an asshole. And I remember, we lived next to him. My parents always said, "Well, you just need to set a good example. We need to set a good example. We need to be good and kind to these people. We need to not retaliate." And I remember when he paintballed the house, my dad went over there and very kindly said, "Hey, can you guys please come clean this up? This is what your son did." And they kind of made fun of my dad, said, "Well, you could just clean it up. If you weren't such a, jackass Christian, basically, we wouldn't do this, right?" And, they made fun of us for going to church all the time and for being, outspoken Christians. And then I remember I guess is going to kind of take the comedy side down, but they left the screen door open in their back porch, and they did an in-ground pool. And they had a very young child that walked out the back and drowned in the pool. And I'll never forget this because my mom went over there to comfort them, and we brought them dinner, and we offered them, all sorts of stuff. And you just imagine if your daughter walked out and died, how inconsolable you would be.
Yeah, no, that'd be horrible.
And I remember my mom going over there and being very kind. And what that did, though, is that opened the door up for her to be able to witness. Now, my mom didn't witness to them when the baby died. My mom didn't rush over there and be like, "Hey, you need Christ now. See, look, Satan did this." Blah, blah, blah,
man, that'd be brutal.
She didn't do that. My mom wasn't that inhuman. But it opened the door up for further conversations. Later on, one of the lady's older sons got basically put in jail for armed robbery and attempted murder. And, that opened the door to have a conversation, and my mom got to witness to him. And so that was the whole point, is we were supposed to be witnesses, so you could get saved anywhere. That was the beauty of it, because we weren't the ones saving. It was Jesus' saving. And, the prayer kind of went a little bit like this. You would say, dear Lord and Savior, thank you for this wonderful day. Thank you for, having us here. Thank you for allowing us to have another breath of life on this wonderful earth. And what we would like to do right now is we'd like to ask if you would allow so-and-so, Mary Jane over here, to be saved. She's come to us and she's saying, hey, Lord, what can I do to be saved? What can I do to grant salvation? And Lord, we're praying to you right now because we're opening, we're asking you, please save Mary. Please let Mary in there. And then what would happen a lot of times is then you would prompt Mary, and Mary would say the salvation prayer. She would say the sinner's prayer. And I'm not going to say the sinner's prayer because I don't know that by heart. And then she would ask Christ into her heart. And then you would go back to the prayer and you basically be like, yeah, thank you, God. Thank you so much. Thank you for saving her. It's by your grace alone.
So you just assume?
It's a complete submission.
You just assume that it's like, he's like, yep, cool. Thumbs up here. And that's the thing. Like, whenever it's like, come on, God, can you save this person? And it's like crickets. Chirp. Like, I would need something more than just like, once you're done with the prayer, it's like, oh, everything's good. We've succeeded. We've saved you. You can go ahead and go eat some cake somewhere or something. Like, that was the thing that you know what I mean? That was the thing that I always get. It's just like, it's like, okay, we finished the rites of passage. We've dunked the baby in the drinking fountain. What do we do? Oh, nope, everything's good. We've sealed the deal. Everything's right. And so that was basically what I felt whenever I heard this kind of stuff. It's like, how do you know? How do you know?
But there was reasons for it, though, Chris. Yeah. There was reasons. Okay, there is reasons. They use Bible verses to back it up. That basically, if you came, you could come and you could justify this. The moment when one is saved, and I'll post the links to this Baptist church website. It says, the moment one is saved, he possesses eternal life now. He that believeth on the Son hath everlasting life. Someone that is eternal can never cease, or it is not really eternal. New life in Christ is as eternal as God himself, and a saved person is promised he will live as long as God does. And so that's the thing, is you don't need any sort of confirmation. And I could tell you what they use as confirmation, to be honest with you, that you get filled with the Holy Spirit. You can feel something different. They ask you, do you feel different? And we could do this. I could actually have you over to my house, and I could set the atmosphere with the music, and I could set the atmosphere with the tone of the preaching. And I have a rhythm that if I practice a little bit longer, I could probably preach to you and then bring you, and if you say, yeah, I want to be saved, you can feel the endorphin rush.
Yeah.
Because that's, in reality, that's what it is. Like, for me, and I've told this before on other shows, probably not on our show, because I don't know if we've ever gotten into origin stories here or not. But when I was at an Atheist Analysis, I kind of gave my origin stories. When I talked with John Mosman, I did my origin stories a little bit. And one of the big things for me when I recognized what an endorphin rush was and understood the science behind it was that I got that out of church. I got endorphin rushes from church. I did, honestly. Like when you prayed and you had like minds with you and you guys were all trying to do the same thing. Well, salvation was kind of the same way because it was something you wanted. You really, really wanted this. And they use that endorphin rush basically kind of as a security. And then they back it up with Bible verses. They say, once God lays out a foundation for what it takes to become saved, and then it's done. They don't believe it's a probation. They don't believe that you have to wait for anything else. You are saved.
That's one of the.
But it's only through God.
It always comes back to something like the Pascal's wager thing, where you can kind of like insincerely get by. You could sneak through. It's like, hey, you know what? I did all the stuff. I took in the all the sauce. I said this is what I wanted, and so I accepted the fact that I'm going to go to heaven, but I'm going to be in I'm going to be in the trailer park, the rent projects for heaven, but I'm still going to get in just by saying all of the things and jumping through the hoops, so to speak, because it doesn't seem like there's any way to confirm, like, are you sincere? Are you 100% legit? And that's where.
Well, they do a little bit though. They do actually do that. They talk about faith because the only way that God can give you grace is if you accept it through faith. You have to accept something through faith. You have to say something, whether it's logical or not.
Well, yeah.
You have to accept it.
But
that's the premise behind it.
To say I'm accepting it, how do you confirm my acceptance through faith? And so I always think it's like, well, someone's really good at just saying, I really, really want to be saved, and I'll do whatever I want to be saved. They'll go through the hoops, and they'll make the big smiley face, and next thing you know, you're saved, and you're going up to at least the first level. You've made it to the first level, you're not going to be on fire in the future. And those are all the questions that I always had, and whenever I asked those questions, I never got answers on that. But I did not know that there was levels. I always thought it was just like that you always hear about the Catholic perspective. It's like you can go in, be absolved of your sins, and so like you murder someone, you go in and you say, well, I did this thing, I accept Christ through my heart, 47 Hail Marys and whatever else that they have you do, and then you're saved again. And this is what I thought you were going to go with, but you took it off on a completely different tangent, which is why this is crazy shit that you used to believe, because you always surprise me with this, man. It's amazing some of the things that the different levels and different layers and all the different interpretations, because this is completely different than what I've ever heard anyone say. But what's to say that this one's right and everyone else's is wrong, or vice versa too?
Well, yeah, even in the Baptists, they have several different discussions about it. They talk about free will, right? Some Baptists don't believe in free will, and some do. And some believe, look at the Westboro Baptist Church. Some of them they believe in predestination, period. As in either you're predestined to be saved or you're not. And that God does choose somebody or he doesn't fucking choose somebody. And that's the way it is. But they also believe that they have to go out there. They have to go out there and have these conversations. They have to put this constantly in the face of people because that's what their job is.
Wow. I don't know where else to take that one, man. That's a pretty solid segment. I would say that, if anybody else has been through this and something similar to Chris's experience, or a little bit different, or maybe a different way, but something similar to that, let us know. Send us a message. Maybe we can talk about it, because it's fascinating the different ways that he could be saved. It's crazy, but it's fascinating too.
Yeah, if anybody has deconversion stories or want to talk to us or send us, we don't really use our blog right now very much because we're so busy, but we have a website. We'll post people's deconversion stories. I fully agree with that. And if you have different, if you're a Baptist and you're like, hey, well, I grew up this way, and you want to actually have a Bible study, we can have a Bible study. We can talk about the differences between the two, because I do find it interesting, even as an atheist. I find a lot of this very, very interesting, and I find this something that I do quite enjoy discussing. Probably because I spent way too much of my life, indoctrinated in it. But, Baptists don't see salvation as a human achievement. They see it as a divine gift. And that's, the big thing that people don't, I think people miss when they look at it. And I think understanding some of these things will help you have better conversations with the Christians around you.
That you can kind of understand where they're going, so you're not missing completely. That's where I always have a problem. I had no idea what you're talking about, so I have no idea how to have that conversation with you.
And I think that's good, and we need these type of things. And the folks over at No Religion Required, they do a really good job of bringing some of these different aspects of Christianity to light. But before we spend any more time talking about Christianity and salvation, because I'm sure you all were saved through that last segment, we got to take a quick commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to talk more about Christianity, and we're going to talk about the 8 reasons atheists convert to Christianity. We'll be right back with more Cellar Door Skeptics.
Hey, what's up? I'm Steve Hayes.
And I'm Dave Curry.
And we're from Prophetcast.
And you're listening to Cellar Door Skeptics
on the Fox News Network.
They're not affiliated with Fox.
Everyone's a Fox affiliate.
If you guys like what you're hearing on Cellar Door Skeptics, please consider sponsoring us on our Patreon page. Our goal at Cellar Door Skeptics is to help promote more science, skepticism, secularism, and humanism in the world. We want to create better content for our podcast and for you, the listener, all while trying to help promote local activism. We're going to strive to make better podcasts, and I'll tell you what, we're even going to contribute some of the proceeds to charity. So please join us over at Patreon.com/Cellar Door Skeptics to make sure that you sponsor us for as little as $1 an episode. Thank you guys so much, and prepare for the revolution.
Looking for something new and exciting, or maybe just a change from the old Atheist show format? Cellar Door Skeptics Podcast provides listeners with hours of enjoyment each week on Spreaker and iTunes. Check us out as we talk politics, religion, science, reviews of books and music, along with the occasional interview just for a twist. Join Christopher Tanner and Chris Hanna every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern as they bring fresh content to you. Walk with us through the cellar door as we help you prepare for the revolution. You can find us on Spreaker, iTunes, YouTube, and even on Facebook.
Hey, my name is Jeremiah.
And this is David from the God Theory Podcast. And you're listening to Cellar Door Skeptics.
Prepare for the revolution.
Now, back to the show.
Welcome back to Cellar Door Skeptics. Thank you all for sticking around through those definitely contradicting segments. If you just tuned in, we started the episode out talking about anti-vaxxers, film aficionados, and then we moved into horrible sex stories, and we ended the last segment with talking about salvation and shit I used to believe. So we're going to kind of continue this and make this a little bit more of a religious episode. So if you like the political side, check out our last two shows that we did. Were very political in nature. This one is a little bit more religious in nature, probably because it's a dedication to Easter holiday. And you know, it's kind of funny, Chris. We were talking about this a little bit, the wife and I were, about how people were getting pissed off, and we were at Myers on Saturday. So on Saturday, I had to work, 6 a.m. to 4 p.m., and then after work, I came home, and her and I went to go get some stuff for the kids' Easter baskets and go grocery shopping, and we're standing in line, and behind us in line is this lady and some other guy, and this guy was bitching, and he was just bitching and bitching and bitching about how people wanted to call Easter a holiday, but not say Easter anymore. And that kind of almost, makes you kind of wonder, like, you hear that about the Christmas holiday, but you don't hear this about the Easter holiday very often. But this guy just kept going on and on and on, and we had a conversation about it. Somebody was using holidays and, and greeting them instead of saying Easter. And I don't see why that's offensive. I don't see why we don't want to be more inclusive. And then it kind of got us to talking about, comfortability aspects. And, we disagreed a little bit. I think it's more because he's probably a Christian. But she made a really good point. And my wife said this. She says, think about it. It's something that's natural. If that guy grew up this way, right, especially if he lived in the area I live in, which is very conservative, if he grew up that way, it's a fair feeling for him, something that makes him feel comfortable. And then, we started talking about comfortability and, how it is. And that kind of brought this topic up that we're going to talk about in a second about atheists converting back to Christians. Because if you have something that's familiar, if you grew up in a certain way, if you were faithful and then left the flock, you left your comfort zone. You had to retrain your Raz, as we talked about a couple months ago.
Oh, man, you're pulling back the old school stuff here.
We are, but it's important because I think, after her and I talked, she made a really good point that guy's comfort level was insane Easter. And that, he was bitching about PC culture and social justice warriors and how they're changing how we see it. But you never know how many holidays there could be at one time. You don't know what people celebrate, whether they're secular or not secular, whether they're Jewish, whether they're Muslim. You don't know that. Hindu, you don't know any of that. And so it brought up, a good point, and it kind of leads into this article we're going to talk about, is why atheists change their mind. 8 common factors. It was written by a gentleman named Matt Nelson over at wordonfire.org. And again, we'll link it into the description. And it kind of goes on. Matt Nelson is a blogger for reasonablecatholic.com, as well as, obviously, wordonfire.org. And he holds a B.Ed. from University of Regina, and he's a doctor of chiropractic from a Canadian Memorial Chiropractic College in Toronto. After several years of skepticism, he returned to the Catholic Church in 2005. Now, alongside his chiropractic practice, Matt is a speaker and writer for face-to-face ministries and a religious education coordinator at Christ the King Parish. And so I just you look at that and you go, he strayed away for a few years, and now he's writing a blog about it. And I guess it's a fair point, right? It's a fair point. We should look at why do atheists convert or deconvert. And I think that what he's trying to do is grasp at straws personally. But let's get into the article, shall we, Chris?
Well, I just want to say, just off the first bat, in his bio, it says, like, I was skeptical for a few years. I am highly skeptical of his skepticism, especially because let's look at his what his resources that he has. He says that he's got a bachelor's in education. Well, his education is in physical education. He's a gym teacher. That's what he got at school. He's a gym teacher, and then he's got a minor in English literature. Which, okay, there's some useful, literary criticisms and literary analysis that he probably had to learn there. But then he goes into the chiropractic world, and there's a couple good uses, when it comes to your core, your back, and some joint issues and stuff. But the chiropractic world is filled with stress relievers, and all kinds of stuff that is just regularly debunked and told to be just absurd. I mean, he says that he's a practitioner of acupuncture and some other stuff. There's a lot of pseudoscience and a lot of placebo effects that are happening in this. So I'm immediately skeptical of anything that he says, because of this, like his skepticism and things like that. Like if you can get pulled into that woo world, I have a hard time believing that he was. This gets into the no true Scotsman fallacies and stuff like that. So whether or not he was a true atheist, blah blah blah. I'm just skeptical that he was ever really questioned, or if he kind of left the fold, he kind of left his religious upbringing and kind of dabbled in some other stuff, and then just jumped right back into what he had. But he never truly left behind that kind of supernatural or that non-physical, materialistic, scientific worldview. And so that's kind of like what I want to just from what I see coming out of his bio, I immediately question his true atheism, however you want to say it.
I still want to caution you, though. I still would caution you that that no true Scotsman's fallacy. We got to be very careful with that, because
I know.
I mean, no offense. If he says that he's an atheist, right? I mean, it's not harming somebody. It's not like he's saying, I'm a bunny rabbit that needs to eat people's brains. I mean, I could be skeptical of that and I can dismiss that and say, you're really not a fucking bunny rabbit that eats people's brains, dude. Like, I can prove this to you. But we want to be very careful. I don't want to say he was never an atheist or he was never questioning or a nun. I would never want to say that. I think the bigger thing is, though, if we look at like our friend Jeremiah Bannister over at Paleo Radio. And if you guys have not checked them out, go to Paleo Radio over at secularmediagroup.com, and you can find all their wonderful shows. They do one every week. They're more political than we are, even, and they're definitely a little bit more conservative. But Jeremiah, came from a very conservative upbringing, and he kind of went to a Catholic upbringing or a Catholic belief, and then went Episcopalian, and then kind of went back and forth, and now he's an atheist. And when we look at it, the flip-floppiness, and the thing is because usually, and this is how he describes it, is that usually a lot of it's the theology all of a sudden bothers them. There's something in it that doesn't make sense anymore because their worldview is evolving. And I have to give Jeremiah credit. He's a wonderful person. He's evolved as a human being. His belief system, the way he sees things, continually changes, and he continually goes and seeks out different things. And maybe we should have had him on for this segment, because I think it would have been fun, to have a conversation with him about this.
You do the same thing. You've actually managed to work your way out of it. This is one of the areas that I have a lot of difficulty. Is I've never been in that to know what it's like to leave it, and so it's hard for me to kind of empathize with what it's leaving. And so all I have is a null hypothesis. It's just, wow, really? That's the wishy-washy world you were in. So I initially am just a little bit suspicious of it. But I mean, obviously, I can't say no. He never really did not believe. Just like I can never say that C.S. Lewis was ever a true atheist. Is one of the authors that he cites in his sources and stuff. But I guess my initial understanding of the way he writes and what he says for his bio, it makes me just immediately, that's like a red flag thing that usually throws up when it comes to like authors. C.S. Lewis was a great example of that when I read some of his Mere Christianity. It's just like, oh, I don't know about that. So that's just kind of where I took from it. And obviously, no, I'm not saying anything specific. And so like he can move around and bounce around, just like Jeremiah and you both have very evolving perspectives, because that's the important thing, that you can do that. And so he went back to Christianity, and he has these 8 awesome reasons. I mean, are they really good or what?
No, I don't think they're very good personally.
No,
I personally don't. And
I can agree with you.
Andrew Krigler again, and that's who we mentioned earlier in the show. He wrote those, and I gave him a pretty detailed. I'm not going to say I gave him 20 paragraphs or anything like that. I mean, I gave him a good 3-4 sentences per one. And so we'll go through each one, and then I'll give you kind of a little bit of his rebuttal to it if he had one. Some of them he actually agreed with me on, so I don't know why he posted the fucking article, but some of them he actually agreed with me debunking. So the first one is good literature and reasonable writing. And he says that the article says this: reasonable atheists eventually become theists because they are reasonable, and furthermore because they're honest. That's stupid as shit. They're willing to follow the evidence wherever it leads, and in many cases the evidence comes to the atheist most coherently and well represented through the writings of believers. So that's fair. I'll actually grant that. I grant that the books and the authors can be persuasive. But persuasiveness doesn't mean that there's evidence for a deity. On both sides of the literature, we see this. We see the literature will lend to a conversion or a deconversion. And the point this point is very valid in that it helps us with the process. But since it happens on both sides, it's definitely not good evidence for a God or Christianity being correct. And, there's not much else that's persuasive outside of the ideas. And we can be persuaded by anybody. I mean, I hate using the Hitler card because I don't want to throw the shock value in there. But think about it. Look at Hitler, right? Hitler was a persuasive-ass motherfucker, and he's definitely not right. We can all agree on that.
Well,
Most of us can.
One of the other directions that I've seen this, and a friend of mine, I talked with him earlier, and he says, well, what about atheists who become Muslims? Did they become, the true believers? They were persuaded by the writings, the logical writings of a different religion. So how do you determine which God is right? What is your definition of God? So there's a lot of murkiness here. It's like there's the assumption. You're assuming the Christian God is the correct and right one without really any evidence to say that one is superior to any of the others. And that's where I have the issue. And my friend David Teachout also, he basically says, well, what about the Muslims? The atheists I'm assuming that some atheists have become Muslims. I agree with that on that. Is that what is God and what, I guess, what would be wrong about that direction particularly versus the C.S. Lewis, the mere Christianic God?
And I don't know, and I agree with you, and that's kind of was what my point was to him. So the next one that this article says is experimentation, and not in the sexual kind, but with prayer and the Word of God. It says the Word of God is living. It has a power beyond human comprehension because it is God-breathed. Again, very poor choice in words, but the article goes on to say this: God speaks to man in many ways, but especially through prayer and the reading of inspired scriptures. When curiosity or even interest of non-believers leads to experimentation with prayer or reading the Bible, the results can be shocking, as many converts can attest. Before we go any farther with this aspect, let me tell you a little bit of a story. Last year, I found an article from a young lady who was in the process of leaving Christianity. She did not completely come out and say she's an atheist. She called herself an agnostic. And she actually took a challenge with Neil Carter. And I interviewed her. And then I interviewed Neil Carter afterwards, and I kind of compared the two. And I should go back and find that episode because I could probably strip out the atheist analysis since I was the only one doing the interviews. And we could probably use that as a show because it was really interesting to hear what her experiment was. And basically, she did experiment, and it failed. It failed her. She did not get what she wanted out of it, and neither did Neil. And so the experiments of praying and having answers and recording a diary of it, it just didn't work for her. And so, my thing is that, prayer we know for a fact has not been shown to succeed. There's many scientific studies that show it doesn't work. And so while this does not debunk it, it lends me to understand that either God only personally interacts with that individual, or that he has chosen to only do so in certain ways, making him inconsistent and not trustworthy.
Oh, I agree entirely. The prayer thing, I would argue, is something that usually doesn't happen the prayer that you put forth does not come true. Only in more rare cases do you get that whoa confirmation bias, and that just solidifies your belief. And if you pray for long enough, eventually something similar will happen that'll kind of confirm your prayer. But like when we have atheists who are making prayer trying to find that truth, my guess is the majority of those prayers never actually succeed. And so the assumption that prayer itself is what's helping atheists switch back over because they're being confirmed all the time, I would argue that reasoning, that logic actually goes the other direction. Because I tried prayer. I tried it in sports. I tried it in life. I tried it in, like, my mother was in a really bad car accident and all kinds of things. There were no actual effects. I was just praying and nothing happened. It just further confirmed my non-belief. And so it could go both ways on this one, and I would say it probably goes the other way more often.
Yeah. And the Christian Andrew, the friend of mine that rebutted this basically, is he said philosophically, God does what he wants. And he says this, he says, if I ask the president to do something and he doesn't do anything about it, only his authority and ability to decide will make it happen. Doesn't mean he doesn't exist. And I would agree with him, but I can fucking see the goddamn president with my eyes. I don't have to worry about that outside of the fact that I can see him, you know. So moving on to the third one is historical study of the Gospels. And now he uses Lee Strobel. This article uses Lee Strobel, The Case for Christ, as an example of it. And it says, the former legal editor of the Chicago Tribune and author of an influential work, which I disagree 100% with that, The Case for Christ, is a prime example of what happens when an honest atheist sets out to establish once and for all whether the claims of the gospel are reliable or not. And they quote Strobel saying, I'll admit it, I was ambushed by the amount and quality of the evidence that Jesus is the unique Son of God. Well, wait, where's the evidence? This article doesn't give any. It just makes an assumption. It assumes that there is evidence, but it doesn't actually say it. It doesn't show anything. There's nothing there. And, you know, so basically the way I see it is I disagree. I think the historicity shows different. And I've debated people that say the same thing. I had David Fitzgerald debate Max Mills, and Max Mills is a liberal Christian on the evidence for Christ. And I can almost guarantee you, and I'm sorry, Max, but I can almost guarantee you that David destroyed you. There is very little evidence in the complexities of the Bible that science supports.
The evidence that most people cite when they're talking about this situation is they're citing an argumentum ad populum. They're citing a source from popularity. That they're saying that since the Bible has survived for so long and the Bible has been around for so long, the fact that it has been around for so long and been so popular is an argument for the accuracy and evidence of the Bible itself. And that is the Bible itself can't be evidence for itself, and that's the circular argument that this usually runs into. The evidentialism it's called, and you can't get around it. And there's very little actual scientific, very little of that kind of stuff survives. We talk about the fossil record and how rare it is for things to be fossilized. Well, the evidence for these events, these crucifixions and stuff, they weren't written about that very clearly. And so, a little bits here and there, bits and pieces, the game of telephone, we don't have much to confirm. And so the evidence, as I said about prayer earlier, it's less and less making me make the assumption and see the opposite interpretation of what he's reading with evidence.
Yep. And Andrew actually said this, and his answer to my response was, as fun as that is, it's not the most convincing argument for him either. And he's a Christian. So the fourth one is honest philosophical reasoning. Philosophy means love of truth. Philosophy is meant to lead one to truth, and it certainly will if the philosopher is willing to be honest and consider the arguments from both sides. And, I kind of, when I see that and I read that, I said, I think, again, this can go both ways. I think philosophy is important and that it is even needed in science. And I know maybe you and I disagree on that, and I don't know if you do or not. I don't really care personally. But, I don't think that's a great way to gauge who converts or deconverts. I don't think this points to anything other than somebody using their personal bias to say, hey, this convinced me, therefore it should convince you.
Yeah, it's an argument from emotion, argumentum ad passiones, or ad passiones, or however you say it in Latin. It's a a personal argument from personal experience and from emotion. Like I had this really big experience. It's an emotional thing that drives it and makes it more valid because I had such a strong response to it. Those kinds of things, while important when it comes to making decisions in your life and your personal character and stuff, they don't qualify for what we would call a scientific evidence or a backing. And so while strong when it comes to finding who you love and what you're going to do with your life, it doesn't quite equate to evidence. And that's where there's a little bit of a disconnect there, because we talk about what is love, what is emotion, what is the feelings that we get, and you have the free will arguments of whether or not the brain is just this machine that's incredibly complex. So we think we have these feelings that are really important, but they're just a series of chemical responses and chemical interactions. Well, we don't know yet. And so these emotions and stuff are still these vague place. And I get it that that's a place where we could possibly hide God, but I'm skeptical of that as well.
Yeah, and Andrew responds with this. He says that if someone says they reason themselves into something and then they provide a contingent or a good reasoning behind it, then it's only reasonable to believe that their reasons are reasonable. So he's right? I mean, I'll agree with you on that, Andrew. I agree 100% with you on the fact that if they feel it's reasonable, we have to allow that they feel it's reasonable. But that doesn't mean it's really reasonable. It just means that they believe it is.
Well, yeah, it's a subjective reason versus an objective reason.
And that leads into the fifth one. The fifth one is reasonable believers. It has been in the obnoxious position of some atheists, but not all, that in order to believe in God, one must have a significant lack of intelligence or reason. I don't know why the hell anybody thinks that, because I've never heard an atheist outside of a troll say that.
The amazing atheist.
Yeah. The article says this: most atheists believe that modern science has ruled out the possibility of the existence of God. For this reason, they tag believers with a lack of up-to-date knowledge. I disagree with that. I'm sorry. I actually disagree with that part of the article. I don't think atheists think that. I think that honesty is a good thing, and that one does show that theists are reasonable. I do think they're reasonable. Not all of them, but a lot of them are reasonable. And they really are most of the time. I disagree, though, that there is valid science for the supernatural, and that technically it would no longer be called supernatural, right, if science could prove it. It would be open to discussing the point, further. But I don't see if science shows something supernatural to be natural or to be explainable through science, which that's all science is naturalism, that it would no longer be supernatural. And so I almost think that this point is a moot point, that reasonable believers can be reasonable and believe bullshit and just be wrong about it. And the best part is science can show that.
Yeah, it's essentially the argument from ignorance is what we're looking at here. Science could potentially one day explain some of these things. I don't think that somebody who grew up in a belief system, surrounded by a belief system, in a country controlled by such belief system, it's not surprising that they end up that way. And it's a testament to a non-believer's strength of will and character that they were able to come to terms with that and move on. But it's not good to denigrate such people that never make it out and never find what we would consider common sense to a certain degree. But it does nothing good to destroy these people and attack these people, because most of the time, what are we doing? We're attacking their character, not their belief, when we should be attacking their belief. And so this is a place where the atheistic community has made some mistakes, and some people really do need to remove themselves from that emotional attack and just have a conversation, as opposed to just be wrong or just be attacking and aggressive like that. Like the science isn't going to make that ad hominem attack. It's gonna say, well, we don't know, but we don't know for sure either in certain cases, and we should just wait a little bit, and we'll hopefully.
And Andrew basically didn't have an answer either. I mean, he basically said, this is too complex. Make sure you send me a message and we'll talk about that farther. Number 6 is called Modern Advances and Limitations in Silence. And I can't read all of this because it's like, we could spend 2 hours here discussing this.
It's the cosmological argument.
Basically. Yeah, basically. And he used Anthony Flew. The article used Anthony Flew, one of the world's most famous atheists of the 20th century, which what defines a famous atheist? We could debate that, for fuck's sake. And then he debated William Lane Craig for the existence of God, and that Anthony Flew goes through all these different things and yada, yada, yada. And to me, it seems illogical because who is Anthony Flew? You know,
I don't know. I seriously have no idea. There's a name that showed up in this article when I started reading it, and Google told me a little bit. But
all right, so Anthony Flew was a philosopher, and he belonged to. He was European, and so for most of his career, he was a strong advocate for atheism. And then he argued one should not presuppose atheism until empirical evidence of God surfaces. So basically, he said that unless you can prove God, you shouldn't believe in him. And, you should take the strong atheist and you should presuppose atheism is true and that we have the ability. So he's been debunked. Anthony Flu's been debunked to a point in that aspect of philosophy. But he had a deathbed conversion.
He's presupposing the null hypothesis, basically.
Yeah, yep.
It's like starting.
That's why I have a hard
negative.
time with him. He's starting with an answer. He's claiming his non-answer is an answer, and that's why I kind of have a problem with Anthony Flew and some of what he did. I don't disagree that he's not a prominent atheist. He was a prominent atheist, but I'm not real keen on him and how he proposes atheism to that.
Maybe he's like an older model. Like we've evolved to a newer, more beneficial, more understanding model. Like the new atheist, I guess, if you want to use that terminology. Like we've kind of moved on a little bit. We refined our arguments, and we've left some of his fallacious arguments behind.
And Andrew basically says, here's a great book called God's Crime Scene. It's clear, concise, and has both sides represented fairly. Though if it's a Christian book, there's no way it could be. So the next one is the evidence for the resurrection, and we will do a segment on this, and I'll have to get David Fitzgerald back on for this, or maybe Richard. Maybe we'll get Richard Carrier on. He was a good guest on Atheist Analysis a couple of times. But basically, they claim there's evidence for the resurrection. And basically what I said is that this is fucking bullshit. I don't think there's evidence for the resurrection. I don't think just because people will converted on a mass basis that shows there's a resurrection. I don't think that this almost presents to me like a strong man, and that science and history genuinely don't back up some fucking, guy rising from the dead. And Andrew responds by saying this. He says, many people did convert because of the evidence of the resurrection at the time. It's a hard thing to study now, though, and it's really just ancient history. But there's some solid evidence for it. And then he goes back into saying Cold Case for Christianity by Lee Strobel was great evidence for the resurrection. So maybe we should read that book, Chris. Maybe we should dedicate a segment every fucking week.
We could do a review. Maybe we could do a review. All I would say to the people converted due to the physical evidence and seeing it and stuff. Well, how come it took until the Roman Empire officially established Christianity as its main religion when we really saw the takeoff of Christianity? So I mean, that's just a simple little question that I always ask people. It's like, well, there wasn't a mass conversion. It took 100 years, 200 years, however many years before we really saw a takeoff. And there aren't like 30, 40, 50 different versions of the resurrection. There's 4, and they're conflicting. So like if all these people saw it, then were they illiterate? They couldn't write. Well, that's a shame. That's a shame. And so that's just I want more. I can't be satisfied with what's in there, and so I just want more.
Yeah, and we won't, and we'll get into that at a later time. We've already gone well over our time limit for this segment, and we got to address the last point. The last point is beauty. Yeah. Beauty is the word that shall be our first. Beauty is the last thing which the thinking intellect dares to approach, since only it dances as an uncontained splendor around the double constellation of the truth and the good, and the inseparable relation to one another. They're claiming beauty is evidence. This is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. I basically said this is just filler. This feels like a filler thing. They couldn't think of 8 things, but they liked the number 8, so they filled it with this. If beauty can convert somebody, then they were not convinced of their atheism that by anything much more than that either. And so that's just bad arguments. They just looked at their personal beliefs and projected them onward and claimed them to be true. It's just, to me, it's just the worst ending to that whole article, and just makes me want to just take that article and go, good, click, delete, bye-bye.
This to me, that last one is like a Creed album filler song. It's just
yes.
It's just mush, man. It's like after Arms Wide Open, then he says beauty makes everything real. No, you know what? Sorry, Scott Stapp. We're gonna move on. You go ahead and just do whatever it is you're gonna do. No, yeah, I agree entirely. This, my buddy David Teachout said the same thing. Peter fucking Creep. Or Kraft, whatever his name is, man. He was disgusted when he was a believer in this guy's stuff, and so I'm not very familiar with it. But like he said that he's not an evangelical; he's more deistic. But that still doesn't take people from using him as and ignoring the fact that he was deistic, more deistic than he was an evangelical. And so this is twisting words and playing games and the artistic and emotional and the beauty side of things. When it's like, well, how can you explain the feel of the color red? Well, you know what, man, I can't answer that question. And as Dawkins says, it's a silly question. It's asked why sometimes it's a silly question. So I'll just leave it at that for that mess there.
Yeah, and Andrew's answer to me was, well, if one doesn't find naturalism to be absolute, well, I don't find naturalism to be absolute, Andrew. You got to stop talking in absolute. Stop trying to trap me. It's not an absolute. I just see that as a naturalism as a most logical explanation until it's proved differently or until better science comes out. That's the way it is.
That's what apologetics has to have. It has to have you take a logical or a completely isolated logical position, and then it tries to break away from that. Apologetics cannot deal with the gray area of life and humanity. It can't do it. It just gets too mushy, and you can't identify certain things like this, like lock it down in black and white binary 0-1, and that's where okay, yeah, your logic, when I write this down on paper, sure, whatever your conclusion is, it funnels directly to that, but you're missing all of this other stuff that makes it way more complicated than the argument that you're putting forth. And so whatever.
Well, I think that wraps it up, Chris. Next week we're going to be talking with the hosts of ProfitCast, a podcast that used to be on the Atheist Analysis Network, one that's been around for quite a while, one I deeply enjoy listening to. We're going to talk with them a little bit, and we're going to talk about the Alabama governor blocking wage increases. So make sure everybody comes back and listens to us next week as we engage a couple of new topics and hope to bring you more entertainment, but not as much entertainment as this week with the bad sex talk. So thank you very much for sticking around with Cellar Door Skeptics, and we'll see everybody on the other side. Have a great night, everyone.
You've been listening to a presentation of Cellar Door Skeptics. Check us out on Spreaker, cellardoorskeptics.com.